way to session 5, and we're just now talking about design. Oftentimes when people take classes like this, they think we're going to immediately jump in and we're going to talk about design. But that's because most people really don't have a very accurate idea of what design really consists of. Good design isn't just some fancy, wild, and crazy, exotic thing. Good design is where every element in your publication works to communicate your message. And that's the kind of design that I want to teach you. First of all, we are going to go over some basic design principles, and these are lots of fun. The first one is that our eye is always automatically drawn to change. When we see the two circles of the same size, our eye immediately jumps over to this one because it just looks so much more interesting. That's why in practical application, headlines are bigger than the body text. That's why you break up things with bigger size type when you have your subheads, your call-outs, all of that kind of thing, because our eye will immediately jump to it. That's why a whole page of text that is all the same size looks very boring. We like the difference. We like the change. The next one goes along with it and is I find quite interesting, and that is that proximity equals relationships. Now here you see we have 3 X's and 3 X's, and then here we have 2 X's, 2 X's, 2 X's. But they're both 6 X's, aren't they? But you see how I just automatically grouped it 3 and 2 and 2 and 2, because whatever's close to each other, we say those go along with each other. Now, let me show you how this applies in publications, and this is so important. I remember when I was working at Young Life, and probably some of you have done things like this, where I put together, remember I was telling you how important captions are, and I put together a whole bunch of photographs, one here, one there, one like this. I placed all of the photographs on a page thinking that this would make it a very interesting layout. Then I numbered them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then on another section of the page way down over in this other corner I had 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you think anybody realized what the caption was and what picture it went with? Not at all. And a lot of times people will do things like this thinking that it looks good, that it's a very interesting artistic layout, when really it doesn't make any sense at all. In our previous session where we talked about how important it is to do good captions to go with photographs, you have to have the caption right with the photograph for it to make sense. Because studies have shown that when you do something like this where you have the photograph in one place and you have the caption in another place, your brain actually physically stores the information in 2 separate places. And then it has to go searching for them, and it doesn't recall them as a unit. And so it's so powerful when you have the caption right by the picture, because the power of the picture will cause you to remember the message in the caption. So you always want to have those right next to each other. Now, another thing that's real important on how proximity equals relationships is when we're laying out our pages, what we oftentimes do, and when we first start out, and I look back at some of the older things that I laid out and I did exactly the same thing, is you will go along and you'll have a section of text, and then you'll have a headline. And then you'll have a section of text, and then you'll do a headline and a section of text, and maybe another headline, more text. And everything kind of floats on the page. But look at, even just with my squiggly drawing here, look at the difference between I have section of text, headline, headline, section of text, headline, section of text. You see how the text looks like it goes under that headline. And you always, when you're organizing your newsletters, your bulletins, all those sorts of things, you want to have more space above your headlines with the text that's above it than below it. And then that says this all is one unit. It's also real important the way you use lines. What happens, for example, here, if I underline that? Does it look like it goes with what's below it? It cuts it off, doesn't it? Now, you don't want to underline in the way of underlining text, but if you use it, if you drop it down low enough so it's below all the descenders, in graphic arts terms, that's called a rule. And you can do that, but it cuts things off. How much better if you say, did something like that? Again, it looks like it's a unit. Now I'll show you how I worked on the design for my book, because I was very conscious when I was working on it that I wanted, I mean, it's real scary when you sort of tell people you're going to do this book on, you know, design or something like that. I mean, it's really, you know, what if it looks awful? I put things, I tried to organize them in such a way, you see how each of the sections, how the header is there, and then how there's the line above it? And see how it makes everything in a nice little contained package. There's no confusion as to what goes with that headline. And then I have a place for clip art or graphics. I have a place for call-outs, that kind of thing. But because that line breaks everything into a nice little section, it all puts it into a good package. Let me find another section that's like that. Oh, here's a real good one. On just what we were talking about earlier, successful level 2 writing. Short sections of body copy, information inside boxes, charts, tables, diagrams, etc. You see how, too, when you do something like this, it's so clear what goes with what. And also, when you design something like this, it's very easy for people to look back at that section. They want to look up something, say, on doing charts or diagrams. It's very easy for them to pick it out. And you want your publications, you want your newsletters, your church bulletins to be like that. You want to have very clear sections, for example, on this is what's for the kids program, this is the adults program, this is the singles schedule. And if you make those sections very clear and bold, either use a graphic to illustrate them, use a line, something like that, where people immediately know what section they're going to, it will help out tremendously. The next one's kind of fun. It's to remember the Z pattern. Now, what this principle teaches us is this is how people look at a page. And it's just important for you to know that, and you violate your knowledge of it sort of at your own risk. What this says is that our eye tends to enter a page, not right up at the corner, but down a little bit and about right over here. And then our eyes naturally, and by the way, this is for English-speaking Western European or the Western European languages type of folks. We tend to go across, we drop down over here, and we get kind of lazy over here. And then we always exit a page at this corner. Now, some of the ways that this applies in design, and when you think about it, isn't this exactly how most publications are laid out? Here's the headline, it goes across, we have sort of a table of contents, not real important material, usually over here. Think of the front page of your newsletter, and then we always have continued on right over here. Now, the ways that sometimes this is violated is, remember how in the very first section I talked about you want to decide what you want to accomplish with your publication. If you're wanting to raise money or you want people to sign up for a class or something like that, you're going to use a reply coupon. If it's put anywhere other than here or down at the bottom, people will not tear it out. I've actually seen some reply coupons like stuck up over here. Somehow that just doesn't seem right. We don't want to touch it. We don't want to bother with it. We want them down here. That's the last thing we respond to. We don't want to go back up, and so you want to position it there. Also, this is a very important place on the page. What people see last is what they will remember. Next time you pick up a magazine, a newspaper, something like that, look at the advertisements in it. You will always find either one of two things down here. Either you will find a specific way that they're asking you to respond, call this number, write in for this, send for that, or whatever, or you will find the logo of a company. And you want to do the same thing. A lot of churches and Christian ministries really suffer from an identity crisis. We tend to, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in color, but we tend to send out all of these pieces of material and nobody even knows they're from the church. One of the best things that you can do in different programs that you're associated with the church is you can design a logo for it, for the children's program or the singles program, the men's ministry, women's ministry. My husband and I just started working with the singles at the church here that I was talking about, and just last week I designed a logo for the group. It's going to be called Oasis, and which we thought worked out really nicely for a singles group, a time of come for rest and refreshment and to go out again then into your world. And I've got some, living here in Southern California, I've got some kind of exotic looking type, and then I've got a palm tree and a sunset coming out from the, oh, I don't even know how to spell Oasis, O-A-S-I-S. And then anyway, there's a palm tree that comes out of that eye. And there's a sun. I mean, The computer really makes me look good. I cannot draw or anything. But we will use that then on all our publications, and when people see that, they'll know it's from our group. And so on a lot of them, then I would want to put it down at this corner of the page. And for a lot of your programs, I'd really encourage that you do something like that and start building an identity for your group. Okay, the next principle is, and this one is so important, that consistency equals professionalism and competence. One thing I keep referring to how certain people just do, or not certain people, everybody makes the same mistakes again and again. And one of the biggest mistakes that people tend to make in their desktop publishing projects when they're just getting started is they want to, they do everything different every time. They use different colors, they use different typefaces, they use different layouts, they use different pieces of clip art, all this kind of thing. And when I ask people why you're doing that, their frequent response is, oh, you know, readers get bored. Nope, readers don't get bored. Readers get confused. You get bored working on it. And so, you know, and you have all these fun toys and all this great clip art, and so you want to use them. And what I tell people again and again is you just have to control yourself. Don't use a variety of things. Look at some of the real classic and most widely read magazines in the world and publications. The Wall Street Journal, for example, they haven't changed how that thing's been laid out since I don't know when. All of your news magazines, they look exactly the same. I remember reading the article about when the New Yorker went from standard publishing to being electronically done. They even had to have a typeface specifically designed electronically for them to look exactly like their old typeface. But what's important in these publications? It's the content. And you see, if you change things too much and you get too wild and crazy, people don't see the content. They'll say, oh, that looked really busy this last week. And you'll say, well, what's going on, though, with the church board? And they'll say, there was an article on the church board in there? You know, and they just won't see that. So you want to come up with some real consistency in the typefaces that you use, in the sections that you have. People, it's amazing, even with short publications like church bulletins, newsletters, that sort of thing, people have favorite sections. One thing people tend to love is, you know, when people's birthdays are listed. It's always pain in the neck to do up, and you always mess up a few people, but, you know, people love it. When are people's birthdays? When are certain reoccurring events, things like this. And whenever you have a consistent column, you want to always put it in the same place. We were talking about this earlier, and someone said it's just kind of like when you go to the grocery store and they've changed stuff in the aisles. That's so frustrating, isn't it? I mean, we want to be able to get our stuff and go. And it's like that with publications. People want their information, then they want to get out of it. So you want to be consistent in where you locate things, in the typefaces that you use. It'll make your stuff look much, much more professional. You also want to be consistent in color. Now, we'll be talking about some other things on color later, but with color, color is one of the strongest things that we remember. We identify things by colors, you know, stop signs, so many things. We remember it's a certain color. Many, many companies, their whole identity revolves around their color. IBM, for example, is called Big Blue. You can all see that, blue IBM. Coca-Cola, I mean, from across the room, when you see a whole bunch of cans, you know that red one, that's Coca-Cola. And color is tremendously important. But what happens so often in church publications? Again, we have no consistency. And one thing I challenge all of you to do when you go back to your churches is I challenge you to get out all of the publications that you produce and lay them out on a table and step back where you can't actually see the printing on them, and then ask yourself, does this look like they came from the same place? And after you've crawled under the table and gone, oh no, point that out to some of the people that are deciding on it, because we tend to, again, we get bored. Oh, we used pink this week. You know, that was kind of, well, let's use the purple paper, you know. And then, again, people don't know who it comes from. And I really recommend that churches and Christian organizations pick a logo, pick a name, pick a color, and stick with it. and use that in a lot of your publications, and you'll begin to have an identity. When people see a piece in the mail, they'll know it's from you. One of the worst things, too, on not being consistent, then you tend to fall prey to what I sort of call the seasonal color syndrome. If it's green, you know, St. Patrick's Day. If it's that awful red paper that nobody can read on when you print on it, must be the church newsletter at Christmas. You know, it really looks bad. And a lot of those changing colors are very hard to read off of, too. So, and two, you know, anything other than white for a newsletter or cream, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot, because a lot of people will have trouble reading it. So, so stay consistent, keep it really simple, real important. And it's okay to bore people. It's better to have them bored and know what's going on than excited and confused. Always remind yourself of that. Okay, how in the world do you figure out where to come up with great designs? These are design sources. And I should have a little subtitled verse here where, as you know, Solomon told us there's nothing new under the sun, and that's particularly true in design. I'm going to jump to the second one here, copy and adapt. That's basically what you want to do. You look at things that everybody else does, and you think you're copying them, but you're really not. Even if you try to flat out copy somebody else's design, you won't. You'll always interject a lot of your own personality, your own ideas, your own background in it, so don't worry about that. Also, designs aren't copyrighted. You don't want to steal other people's writing, their cartoons, anything like that. But if somebody, say, uses a typeface that you really like, or does something 5 columns, or they use their call-outs in a certain way, that's not copyrighted material, and you can adapt it as you wish. You want to create your own design files. I have files for brochures I like. I have files for newsletters I like. I even have one file for unusual folds. It's kind of fun to see how people fold different things. As you're on your own design, as you're putting that together too, always remember who you are. Some designs are not appropriate for different groups. One thing that Christian groups often run into is they can't over-design, they can't make something look too expensive, because then, especially if you're trying to do fundraising, and so you always have to reach for this middle ground. And then also always remember who your audience is and design for them. And this can get really tricky in the church, because sometimes you're having to put together pieces that will appeal to a lot of people. Other times you're doing something specifically for the youth or for the men's ministry or whatever. And there are some ways that you can tailor your things specific to those groups. And one of the best ways to do it is to go to the magazine stands right now. And magazines, as you know, are getting ever more and more fragmented. Not only are there magazines now that are for computer users, it's for Apple users or PC users. Not only that, it's for PC users who use multimedia between 3 and 4 in the morning. I mean, you know, it's just crazy stuff, you know, so narrow. But say you've got to do something for a men's ministry, go look at how some of the men's magazines are being designed. Say you're doing something for a teen ministry, pick up several of those examples. Very, very different design. You're doing something for a women's ministry, pick up something in that area, and then use those typefaces, use that kind of a layout. They'll be very, very different, but you will be speaking directly to your audience. In summary, on design, the most important thing that you need to remember is good design is design that communicates. It's design that gets across your message well and that tells people that particular part of the gospel of Jesus Christ that you want to get across in that particular printed piece. Well, welcome to session number 6 of how to do bulletins, newsletters, and all sorts of other wonderful projects with desktop publishing for your church or ministry. We are now going to be talking about clip art, photos, and color. These are some of the really fun things. Sort of think of them as frosting on your desktop publishing publications. By the way, I need to say that you can do wonderful communications pieces without using any of these things. Again, many of the very popular publications in America today, the Wall Street Journal being one of them, Kiplinger Report, which is one of the most successful and long-running newsletters in America, they don't use any of these sorts of things. But clip art, photos, and color do add a lot of fun to your publications, and there are some very distinctive ways that you can use them and make them much more successful. The first thing is clip art. Now, clip art tends to have a bad rap. People make fun of it, and I think a lot of that is because they don't really realize what clip art is. For companies that publish clip art, what they do is they hire wonderful artists. They pay them good amounts of money, and these people do drawings that then all of you can use without violating copyright. And I find that people do much better in their use of clip art if you start thinking about it as if you had to pay for each of those images. Think if you were actually buying those images, if you were asking someone who was a professional artist to do them for you, how would you use it? Now, I can guarantee that you wouldn't use it little bitty sort of measles fashion. And that's how people tend to use clip art. They'll get just these little tiny scrunched up things, and they'll put them, you know, just kind of all over the page. And that way, no picture really has much importance. No image stands out. Nothing really grabs your attention. But if you were paying for one really good drawing, wouldn't you probably use it larger? Wouldn't you make more of it? And so I find sometimes just thinking of that will help you on your uses of clip art. Size and placement can make a big difference. Let me just draw, for example, up here. Say you have a page, and you have a number of articles. Let's say here's an article. Let's make it a little longer. And here's an article, and another article, and another article. Okay, and you just do, you know, like a little thing of clip art here, and a little thing of clip art here, and a little thing here, and a little thing here. And, you know, you threw in a couple of them because you didn't have much space, and then you kind of put one right in the center there. And it sort of looks kind of, doesn't really look very important. But what if you organized your articles more closely together? Say you had 3 articles, you put all the articles together, and then you had one great big drawing that you actually blew up and used in a large section. That would make a statement. That would look like you were trying to illustrate something with your clip art instead of just having these little bitty things scattered throughout. Another thing that you can do with clip art, a lot of times if you just blow it up, you can mask out part of it. You can either put a black line over it, you can add a black box, you can do all sorts of really interesting things with your clip art to give it more importance. Computer placement and manipulation provide options. What I mean by that is a lot of you are familiar with clip art books, the traditional ones, and Gospel Light has got some wonderful clip art books. Here's their one on kids workers clip art. Here is one on one for church bulletin workers. Here's one, I want to show you some stuff out of the kids one in a minute. Here's one for youth group workers. Now, what they've got in them, and many of you are familiar with this, is it's just got a lot of the drawings that you can cut out and paste on. But what they also have, now I've taken it out because it would fall out, but what they also have is they now have a lot of the clip art available on disc. And what you can do, it's really neat. In fact, I'm glad I turned to this page because I just did a review of this clip art I write the monthly desktop publishing column for Christian Computing Magazine. See these stars? They're really neat. But what I did with them is I used them just as a background. And I took these stars and then I blew it up really big. And you can do that because this is on disk. You can just size it in your program. And then I put a white box on top. And then I put another piece of clip art on top of that and some words and all. And that made the stars made a really neat little frame. And so you see with the computer, you can take it and you can do so many more interesting things with it. And so when you get the computer clip art, think of it not just as individual drawings that you place, but think at it as parts of illustrations. You can combine things, you can move stuff closer together. If you have some of the programs where you can actually manipulate and color the art, you can do even more things. I tend to find that even though I've got some of those programs, I never have time to use them. But just in the basic programs that I have, I find boxing things, or let me tell you, for those of you that are not familiar with how to create electronic whiteout in your desktop publishing programs, what you do is you draw a box, and you can actually do this on any of your page layout programs, any program that you can draw a box, and you draw the box, and you select the color as paper, and you select the line as reverse. And what that does is that whites out any section that's behind it. And so you can cut off chunks of pictures. You can do all sorts of things. I was doing something for a church publication a number of years ago, and I wanted to use this lady, and this was for an extremely conservative group. I wanted to use a lady who had earrings on. And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, those are not appropriate." And I said, "Oh, boy." So what did I do? I had to draw a series of all these little boxes around to cover up the lady's earrings on the clip art picture. But it can be done. So when you pull out the clip art, just think of a whole lot of the ways that you can use it. Don't just feel like you have to just grab the package and use it as is. Don't just use it to fill in empty holes. A lot of times people say, "Oh, you know, I mean, we really need to put something in there." Oftentimes it's better just to leave that blank. White space is okay. It's restful for the eyes, and it's just fine. Then the last thing here where I say, don't forget dingbats. Now, what the dingbats are, they're also called wingdings in the Windows programs. They are these little elements that we oftentimes use as little bitty. They have the little hearts, the little crosses, all that kind of thing. What most folks don't realize is, did you know that you can print them as large as the resolution of your printer will go? You can take those, because they are a font, you can take those and you can make them as big as the entire page if you want to. Those wingdings are really an entire clip art library hiding in your computer. Now, not only can you make them large sizes, but you can, I'll tell you a couple of other tricks with them. You can make them in all kinds of shades of gray. And you know what's the cheating way to do that? This is a kick. You make them a different color. Anything that you want to make a shade of gray, even with your black and white printers, is you just select it as a different color. For example, in my newsletter, see this up here? That's lime green. Now, it looks like just a nice shade of gray, but according to my computer, that was lime green, and it printed it out this shade. And so you can see with the dingbats, say you wanted to do something where this is kind of a stylized heart. Maybe you had a heart and you wanted to put a cross on it. You can make this, according on your computer screen, you can do this lime green. When it printed out, it would be a pale gray. Maybe you wanted to put a black cross right on top of it, and you could put together some of your own images. It's really fun. The other thing that you could do, this is just a kick. You can apply any of the type styles to your dingbats. That's how you get, by the way, how you get little square boxes. Any of you that have used the dingbats or the wingdings, you know they have the shaded one, but sometimes you just want a square one, but they've only got a black square one. You know how you get a little square box? Outline. That'll do it. Down here, for example, we've got the regular one, and this is a little heart. You just apply outline to any of them, and it'll just make it the outline. You do shadow, and it'll shade it. You do reverse, and then you can put it in a box, and you reverse it out. And you can come up with some wonderful illustrations. There is a wonderful company called Proclaim that puts out a whole set of Christian dingbats. And they are wonderful. I've used them, for example, one of them that's a lion's head. And I took it and I reversed it and then put it in a black border and then wrote a verse, and then I had down at the bottom a Star of David that I reversed and made bookmarks out of those. So you've just got all these kind of fun things. I'm personally not really into the high-end illustration programs. They're fun, but they just take too much time. And for most of us that are doing desktop publishing in ministry, we just don't have 10 hours to go play with a beautiful design. I mean, wouldn't that be great if we did? But we don't. But with the dingbats, you can do some very interesting things. On applying the type styles also, one of the things that it doesn't work for everything, but you can also italicize them all. You can make them kind of tip sideways. And one that I used this for that was just so much fun, I was doing a sort of a little postcard thing, and I wanted this cascade of flowers, and you know the little wingding or dingbat that's a little flower? I did some outlined, I did some big, I did some little, I did some italicized, and it just tilted the flower. It made them look a different shape, and then I just scattered this whole thing of flowers coming down the side of a brochure. So you can have a lot of fun doing some of that. So don't forget your dingbats. They're fun. By the way, the term dingbat was originally a term that meant printer's mark. It was the sign that printers would carve to show you that this particular product came from a certain printing company. And you know, some of you have seen that dingbat that it's like an anchor and then it has a fish wrapped around it. That was Aldous Manutius' dingbat. That was for the Aldine Press. That was his mark, his trademark. That's also where we get trademarks. That was one of how he designated the things that came from him. So I'm into historical trivia. Okay, photo tips. Now, this is so obvious, but we do it all the time. Why is it that we stand someone up against a wall, we tell them to smile, we shine a bright light in their face and make them jump, and then we wonder why the picture came out so awful? You know, it's kind of crazy, isn't it? We do these terrible things to people and then, oh, gee, how come you don't look more natural? Why, you know, what is this? And I have found again and again, we talk about how important photographs are and how people will always look at that photograph, they'll read the caption, but you've got to take a decent photograph. And people in ministry photograph best when they're involved in their ministry. When I was working at Young Life, what I would do is, to try to get a Young Life leader to stand up against the wall and take a picture, it just, just didn't work. And so what I would do when I would have to photograph people is I would always take somebody with me. And I would get them talking to that other person. And people in ministry, they're people. They interact with people. And as they were doing that, then I would be walking around taking pictures, and I got some great shots that way. Because as they were engaged in conversation with the other person, then they really came alive. Those of you that do work with children's groups, nothing is more awful than standing up all your nursery workers against a wall and taking a picture of them. That's horrible. You photograph any one of those people, though, interacting with the kids, and I guarantee you they will look like a completely different person. So you want to really work on your photographs. You want to be very sensitive also. And this is something I feel very strongly about, is that always in our photographs we retain the dignity of people. So often when we're in ministry situations, it's very tempting to take a photograph of someone in actually what I would consider a really demeaning position. People in poverty, battered women, people with AIDS. There's so many things like that where they're really horrible situations, people with handicaps. And I strongly, strongly caution you not to take pictures of people in those situations. It's demeaning to them as persons made in the image of God. And there are always take the after picture. Show me the children who are fed and who are going to school. Show me the woman who is working and in charge of her life again. Show me someone who is healed. When you're taking a photograph also of someone in a wheelchair, it's very important that just even the angle that you take it. If, say, if all of you were sitting in wheelchairs and I took a picture of you standing up, looking at you now, what would I see? You'd just see all the apparatus, wouldn't you? But if I stooped down and shot straight across, what would I see? I'd see the person, wouldn't I? And so sometimes it just takes us thinking a little bit. That's real important with kids, too. So often all the kid pictures that we have, they all look like these little squatty midgets. And that's because we're taking these pictures, looking down at them. A couple of years ago at Christmas, one of my little friends borrowed my camera. I now have, because I've totally ruined my eyes and can't focus anything anymore, I have one of those cameras that you can just point anywhere and it'll focus, take a picture. She discovered that. She thought that was so cool. So she wants to take a picture of me at Christmas. So there's the little squatty midget shooting up. It is not an attractive angle. And I thought, after the picture came back, I thought, but I've been doing that to her for years. And so some of us learn our lessons in some ways and some of us in other ways. But really be very, very sensitive when you take pictures of people. Another thing you can do, and I discovered this by accident, this is so neat, is you can, if you really want a picture and you're trying to be sensitive, one of the things that you can do is you can run your photographs through your scanner and you can scan them in as line art. This is just a regular photograph scanned in as line art, and I was using it for a Christian counseling center that I was working with, and they wanted something of a couple, but they couldn't afford photography, and I didn't want to just show people's faces anyway. And here, you know, I've showed it, and I was just, you know, scanner one hand trying to do some stuff, and I did it the first time by mistake, and this is what came out. And what it will do is it will always just pick up the light and dark areas. And with this, you see this couple sort of sitting there, and they look like they're kind of deep in thought and all that kind of stuff. And it worked great for the brochure. You can also take photographs of buildings and of trees and of all kinds of things and run them through your scanner. And just the high if you scan them in then as line art, just the high contrast areas come out. And again, you can end up with some wonderful illustrations, some wonderful pieces of artwork. As I said earlier, I've worked with troubled kids quite a bit, and I've seen some fantastic brochures done of kids in difficult settings where they did this because it protects people's identity. And sometimes you have to be very concerned about legal issues. You do something like this, you get the emotions come through, but you're not actually showing people's faces. So it works really well. By the way, this is actually a picture of me and the printer at Young Life sitting on a hay bale in the sun at a staff picnic. But you know, you never know what's going to come out, so kind of fun stuff. Okay, on your photographs, of course, always use a caption. We talked about the importance of captions a little while ago, but let me give you another illustration. All of you envision a group of ladies cooking in a church kitchen. That's your photograph. They're standing over a pot cooking. Now, I give people, and I'll answer the question, but just in theory, is it caption 1, 2, or 3? Caption number 1. We welcome back Jennifer Thomas, our camp cook. Even hip replacement surgery couldn't keep her away from cooking meals for the kids she loves. Caption number 2, the Becomers class is sponsoring a chili supper this Friday. Please get your tickets early so you won't be left out. Caption number 3, we need more volunteers at the soup kitchen. Be sure you sign up this week so we can continue in this important ministry. And then if I say, you know, which caption do you think fits a picture? And you'd be thinking, 1, 2, okay. The answer is none of them. I made them all up. I don't know what that picture was about, but you know, it could have been any of these things. And you see, that's what people will do if you don't put in the caption. They'll make up their own stories. We're innately storytellers. I do a lot of work with Christian Camping International, and I sort of tease them a little bit, and I tell them, you know, you guys really don't need to do new brochures every year. You got to just swap. They all look the same. If I say camp brochure, what do you think of? Kid rappelling down mountain. You know, happy campers standing here. You know, they're all the same. And without a caption, how do you even know what camp it's from? So I say, you know, why spend all that money on photography? You know, just send them to each other. And and then they, you know, they kind of go, oh yeah, you know. But photographs, again, are so important, but without a caption, they completely lose it. I'll never forget this one photograph. I was working on a project with Prison Fellowship, and they had this great picture, and they have fantastic photographers, great picture of this gentleman and his son, and it was a very powerful picture. But without the picture, you know, what's it saying? And the way we captioned it for the brochure that we were working on is it said Antonio Harris and his son. It had the label. And a lot of times people label it, but then, you know, they just stop there. And it went on to say Antonio is now a youth pastor because people from Prison Fellowship loved and cared for him and his family while he was in prison. And you see how just in those 2 lines, you can summarize the message of your ministry, you can tell people what it's doing, and you have the power of the photograph to lock it into people's minds. So real important stuff. Finally, in using photographs, you always want to shoot tight, crop, and you want to print large. Very briefly on colors in desktop publishing, your PMS colors, that stands for Pantone Matching System. These are ink colors that theoretically printers will be able to match anywhere around the country. The operative word is theoretical. You'll get pretty close, but your printers will have a chart like this where they can match colors and you can select colors. On colors, it's just important for you to be aware of color trends. Colors go in and out of fashion. Southwestern used to be very in. Now Northwestern is very in. The colors of the curtains behind us, this dark green is an extremely in color. Purple is very in. The yellows are really in right now. What flower is it you see all over the place at this present point in time? Sunflowers all over. And things go in and out of fashion, and you certainly don't want to be behind on a color trend. When I say to you avocado green and gold, what is your immediate reaction? Ugh! You know, that used to be really in. I've lived long enough to remember it. So be aware of color trends. How do you find out what color trends are? You can just look at magazines, and you'll see that. Go to a magazine stand, the colors that are used on their cover, the colors that are used in decorating magazines. Color trends first appear in decorating magazines. Also, look and see what color plastic containers they are using at the discount stores. A few years ago, you know, it was all mauve and pale blue, all the containers. Now, it's the cobalt blue and the dark green. You want to know an accent color to use for your newsletter? Cobalt blue, dark green, you can't go wrong. You don't need to print it. You can actually do hand coloring. You can color over things. And the color copiers and printers are very useful, but they're not useful for long runs in ministry. They only work for short runs and for specialty applications, although they can be lots of fun. So we've talked a little bit about color, a little bit about photographs, and a little bit about clip art. These are wonderful little details and desserts to use in your desktop publishing projects, but certainly not necessary to make good pieces that communicate. Welcome to session 7, newsletters, bulletins, and how to do all sorts of other wonderful and amazing things with your computer with desktop publishing. On this one, we are talking about proofing and paper. Now, you might not think that proofing is fun to do, but it can be a true adventure and treasure hunt. You need to always think of it like that. Now, I've got a number of suggestions for ways to do proofing. First of all, and you all know this one, but it doesn't hurt to remind you, that you don't want to trust your spell checker, but use it anyway. Spell checkers are really dumb, but they do catch a lot of things. They can't tell if you've used the wrong word, but one of the things that I find them most useful for is things like where words are scrunched together, or where you've capitalized incorrectly, and it'll catch just a lot of those things just as it's doing the spell checking. Now, one of the things that the same cautions that apply to using a spell checker also apply to one of people's favorite ways of proofing, or I hear people mentioning it again and again, and I tell them not to do it that way, and that's where people will proof reading backwards. What that does is that turns you into a human spell checker, because you don't get the word in context. Yes, you catch misspellings, but if it's there and there, or it's and it's, you won't catch it doing it that way. So you do want to use the spell checker, but don't trust it entirely. Then I say use the same system and purple pens. Now I'm going to explain purple pens, and then I will go back to what the same system is. One of the things that I have found in doing proofing and that sort of thing is people don't want to upset you. People in the churches want to be really nice, and so you've done something, and first of all, people are usually so astounded that you were able to get that computer to work, and the layout looks so good and all that kind of thing. They don't want to mess with it, and they don't want to mess up your pretty pages. So what they will want to do is they will want to proof using a pencil. Another reason people want to proof using a pencil is everybody has flashbacks of when their work was being bled all over in high school and the red ink. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. They don't want to do that to you. So what they do is they proof in pencil, and then you get it back, and you can't see what they did. And then you don't make the changes. The second time around, they're mad. You know, then they don't care what they do to your stuff. So what I found works really well is give people something like a bright purple pen or bright green or neon pink or something that really stands out, and tell them, use this in your proofing. You won't offend me, but I really need to see what you're marking. Another thing that someone did for me recently, just by accident, and this helps so much, is she did that, and she used the marks that I'm going to show you how to use in just a moment. But what she did is she highlighted, she used a yellow highlighter actually over the word that I needed to correct, and then in the margin what I needed to do with it. And boy, did that help when I was retyping, redoing stuff. I mean, it just jumped out at you on the page. Another thing that you can do, just tool-wise, see, I don't have one here. All of you envision for a minute, one of the problems we have with proofing is our eyes jump between lines. And one of the problems that we have is we want to stay on the same line. Envision, you know, the metal file folders, the hanging ones. And you know how there's that metal bar across, and then it drops down about so much, and there's like a little indentation? Take one of your file folders, and I have these bright blue ones that I use this for, and cut right along that. And then that little thing makes the most fantastic proofing tool. You can hold on to that metal part and just use that to proof down your lines. And it's great too when you're proofing columns and you need to see across a page. And too, that metal bar, it's just really handy to use. I've got those stashed all over my office and they work really well. Then I also tell people to use the same system. Now you have in your information packet and also in the book, I have a proofing sheet. And this I encourage you to copy and to give to all of the people that you're working with on your proofing projects. The reason I encourage that is what people will tend to do is they will tend to, and this always just drive me out of my mind, they'll put like just a question mark in the margin. Now, as you can tell by seeing what I have done on the board, I can't draw. I also can't spell, and I can't type. I mean, the computer has made life beautiful for me, but I'm serious about that. And so when somebody would just put like a question mark there, I would just think, what did I do wrong? Did I spell it wrong? Maybe it's the wrong word. Maybe they don't like my theology. Maybe, you know, I mean, I would just get totally paranoid, and I wouldn't know what in the world was wrong with the thing. And so instead of the question mark, teach people how to use true proofers' symbols. These come out of my old journalism background, and they're just tremendously useful. It's very easy to see to delete a character, to delete a whole word, to transpose, a spelling problem, close up. All of these are very standard marks. This one's real helpful. Stet means to let it stand. If you've changed something or made a mark but then you change your mind, no, it was fine the way it was, you can write that by it. And when everybody is using the same marks, if you say have these marks in the margin and then you've highlighted that with a yellow pen, boy, does proofing go quickly. Really, really quickly. Another thing that I tell people to do is when you're proofing and you need to make a lengthy correction, just put a number and then write out what you want the correction to be on another sheet. People try to scrunch stuff in too much, and it makes it very hard to see what's going on. So please do use this form. Now there's some other guidelines on here, but they are also on the overhead, so I'll go over them on this because it's easier to see. The next tip is to proof on levels. Many of us started out where we only needed to proof words, and so that tends to be what we still want to do, and that's important. But even on that, you need to proof levels. And what I mean by that is you want to, well, not only to proof your word level, but also your graphics and lines, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But on your words, don't try to proof the whole page of a newsletter all at one time because you'll miss things. What you want to do is you want to read through all of your text at one time. Then you want to read through all of the captions at one time, and you want to proof your headlines separately, because that's where most people tend to make their mistakes. We just assume headlines are correct. And some of the funniest errors in journalism have been made in headlines because people don't proof them. We kind of look at the whole page and we just don't see that. After you've proofed for your words and you've gotten those all right, then you can go on to another level. Now, before I describe that level, I want to backtrack just a little bit. Before you do your final proofing, or any proofing for that matter, make sure you have everything. One of the things that will help the production of your publication so much is you've got to train the people that you work with that you won't do layout until you get all of the pieces. People who aren't familiar with desktop publishing don't realize how hard it is to try and do a layout of anything if you don't have everything. If you don't have all of the photographs, if you don't have all of the schedules, if you don't have the complete text of things. And sometimes you need support from whoever is in charge of your department, church, ministry, whatever, to back you up on that. But if you don't have all of the pieces before you start doing the final assembling of the project, you're going to be backtracking, you're going to be doing needless editing, you're going to be shifting around and all those kinds of things. And it will just take you so much more time and lots of frustration. One of the things, too, when you're doing desktop publishing publications, everything tends to work together. In the newsletter that I showed you that earlier in another session, I showed a newsletter that was blue and yellow and had black text. In that one, as in all newsletters, it's got text, it's got photographs, it's got captions. You want to make your captions go with the text. You want to emphasize the main point, all of that sort of thing. If you don't have the photograph when you're doing the layout, how can you do that? And the person that was editing that newsletter has had a lot of trouble getting people to send in pictures on time. And I've told her you need to set a deadline for it, and if people don't send in the pictures, then their pictures don't get in. But you can't lay out a story without knowing how many pictures you're going to have, what the pictures will say, because it's all got to fit in as a whole. Let me give you one little tip that one of my students said that he did. It was a gentleman who was doing layout work in his job, and I'm sure many of you have run into this where people will bring you last minute things and they'll say, oh, just this one other little change, just this one other little change. You've all heard that. And he said this kept happening and happening, and one afternoon he said to his boss, he said, well, you know, since it's just one other little change, why don't you sit here by me while I make it? He said 3 hours later, his boss had a little bit more of a conception of just what one more little change meant. And so sometimes you might need to do that. And I would recommend for all of you, sometimes people get real picky and funny on proofing things, that you have the people that you're working for actually sit down and watch you do a project. People don't realize how, you know, maybe they've laid out something a certain way, and then a lot of people are not visual at all. They don't know what to tell you. They just know that after you've done it, they don't like it, you know, that kind of thing. And they don't realize by changing these 3 words up here how the whole page shifts around. Because what they have heard is they've heard from the advertising how easy desktop publishing is to do. And it helps tremendously. And I've had so many churches say, you know, when I actually sat my pastor down with me and he watched what it took to lay out this page, he had a whole different understanding of it. Yes, desktop publishing is easy compared to running an entire print shop, but it isn't easy. And if a lot of you are feeling overwhelmed in your work, I always tell people that's an accurate assessment of reality. It is very overwhelming. It's tough stuff to do. So, so those are some things that actually help you in preliminary to the proofing. So, okay, you've got all that stuff. You have everything in at once. You've proofed your words. Then you want to proof things like your spacing. I was showing in a previous seminar how important it is for the headline to be close to the copy after that. That may take some adjustment. You want to look through and make sure that that's consistent throughout your publication. One of the, again, the real giveaways of a professional publication is that the spacing is consistent throughout. Next time you pick up a magazine, look at how there's always the same amount of space between the headline, the subhead, and the body copy, between the drop caps and where text starts and all that kind of thing. And sometimes when we're just kind of throwing stuff together, we're not real careful on that. You want to proof that. You want to make sure that your lines are the same thickness between different sections that are the same importance. Did you use a double line in some places, a thin line in some, a thick one in others? Again, you want to be real consistent on all of that. To just see how your overall page looks in what's called its color, a really kind of neat thing to do is to take your page and to sort of hold it at arm's end and to turn it upside down. And you'll see where there's inappropriate white spaces and where it just, you know, the design doesn't look like it holds together because you're just looking at it as a mass of objects at that time. So do the proofing in levels. Now, some tips for proofing over the fax machine. Faxing stuff back and forth is just a great way to proof stuff. And when I was doing more just freelance desktop publishing, I did this a lot. You have to be real careful, though. Several things on faxes. You can never write with pencil because that doesn't come through. And even ballpoint pen on a lot of machines, it just does not work very well. The only thing that you can be assured that it will come through on faxing is to do the really fine point fiber tipped pens. Those are the only things that really, really work well. Then you want to be real careful that you don't write anything in the side margins. On a newsletter, even like this one, that appears to have really generous side margins, fax machines don't read all the way to the edge of the paper. They read about that far in. And I remember I had one individual I was working with on the East Coast. This was when I was going to graduate school. And she sent me some stuff, and I was freelancing for this ministry, and then I would do the stuff. And I can remember faxing some stuff back to her, and she said, "Why didn't you make the corrections I wanted?" And I said, "Well, I did." She said, "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did." And then after a little bit of figuring, we realized that she had made her corrections in the margin here, and the fax machine hadn't picked them up at all. And faxing is sometimes one of the easiest ways to do stuff. Some even large organizations, they fax between departments because it's just simpler. But if you're doing that, if you don't have space in between to write, get some of that, stick-on tape, the Post-it stick-on tape that you can just put over a section, write your corrections on that, but make sure everything's within the body of your publication. One of the best things, of course, is to give yourself time. More mistakes come up if you just are able to sleep on something overnight. If you can't do that, if you can even get up and walk around, it helps. Very most important thing, I think, on proofing is to know when to quit. That is one of the real hazards of desktop publishing. One of the occupational hazards is we can always do it just a little bit better. It's, you know, oh, we'll just change this, and we'll just do that, and we'll just, I mean, I'm finding that out with so many of the projects that I do, because now I'm in a place where I kind of control them, and it's, well, if I just added this one other story, or if I just, and we have to set deadlines for ourselves. When we say this is good enough, there's always going to be another one. Winston Churchill has a great line where he says that perfection equals paralysis. Isn't that good? And haven't we all been paralyzed trying to get something absolutely perfect? And we're going to have to just redo the thing next week anyway, so, you know, just keep it up. And I'm always encouraged when I think of the Apostle John's words, where he talked about how even if all the books in the world were filled with stories about Jesus, you know, it still couldn't contain all of them. And you sense a real frustration when he was finished writing his gospel. It's like, this just, you know, it just doesn't do it. Doesn't do what he wanted it to do. And I think, well, you know, if he was writing the inspired Word of God, he still wasn't happy with it. Who are we to think that our stuff is going to be perfect? By the way, if any of you ever create a publication that does not have one single typo in it and it's absolutely perfect, keep it to yourself. None of the rest of us want to hear about it, particularly not me. Okay, paper. Briefly, just a few notes on using paper in our desktop publishing projects. Quality can make a big difference. If you have a choice between using really good paper or a second color, go with the good paper. If I even just say to you, imagine something printed on really heavy, white, creamy linen ragstock paper, and imagine something printed on turquoise bond Xerox paper. I don't care how many colors are on that Xerox bond purple paper, it's just not going to look very good. Whereas the quality of paper makes a big difference. And one of the little tricks, too, if you're doing just short runs of things for your church or ministry, if you purchase your own paper and you take it to a lot of the quick print places, they'll print it for you much more cheaply than if they supply the paper. It's one of those really funny things. At Office Depots all around the country, you get just bargain rates on printing stuff if you supply the paper, even if you go over to their shelves and you buy it and bring it over there. And I said to him a while back, I said, do you people realize that if I do? They go, oh yeah, don't ask questions, that's just how it is. Kinko's, a lot of the places, you can, they'll just charge you the copy price, and you can say it's 7 cents a piece, and then they'll charge you 15 cents to use one of their really pretty papers, almost double, where you can just go to the paper store, pick it up for 3 cents a sheet, and they just charge you the copy price. So you can, I've done all sorts of things like that, where you can print up really nice stuff for much less expensive. Another thing too, speaking of ways to save money, you can go to the paper stores and you can get card stock, and you can print up your own postcards. Because Kinko's and all of those places, they'll charge you 15 cents a sheet for card stock, but they'll just charge you the 6 cents to print it, just like any copy if you bring in your own. And as we have talked about in other sessions, postcards are such an effective way to get out ministry messages. That's a real fun and very inexpensive thing to do. So you need to also know your production methods in selecting your paper. Some papers will go through a laser printer, some will not. The laser printer was invented to be a short-run printing press. And usually anything under around 100 copies to 200 copies, depending on the price break that you get from your printer, you can print more inexpensively on your laser printer. If you haven't kept track of copies per toner cartridge, I strongly encourage you to do that, because you get extremely good quality copies off your laser printer, far better than if they're photocopied. And for many, many jobs, it is more cost-effective to just print them yourself. However, you need to be very careful that the paper that you select is laser printer compatible. Some of the more recycled looking papers and some of the more recycled papers will have fibers that will come off in your laser printer and will clog the machine. Typically, a paper that goes through a laser printer well has a very smooth, hard finish. Always ask your paper merchant if it doesn't say specifically that this is laser compatible, or you can ruin your machine, because a lot of that paper was designed to be used on high-speed printing presses where it wouldn't jam them as much. So you need to be careful, because you really have a print shop in your office, and you can use it probably far more than you have been, and in many ways much more cost-effectively. The pre-printed papers are lots of fun. Those of you that haven't seen them, the ones with different scenes and colors and all of that kind of thing. If you are not familiar with Paper Express, or Papers Direct, excuse me, let me give you their number. It is 1-800-A-PAPERS. And they will send you a catalog of all of their designs and all of their shells and all kinds of things like that. I warn you, however, you will receive a catalog every 3.5 minutes. They send a lot of catalogs. 1-800-A-PAPERS. But great fun source. If you haven't used their stuff, they're marvelous for doing short runs of ministry brochures and things like that, because you can get a 4-color shell, plop in your message. Would never be cost effective to do the run yourself. I was already talking about bulking or buying your own papers. If you haven't done that, do check into the paper merchants in your area. You can oftentimes, and just look in the yellow pages under paper merchants, you can oftentimes get very, very good buys, come up with some very unique papers. Alrighty, in this session we have talked about proofing and we've talked about paper, two of the final things that you work on to complete your desktop publishing projects, and two things that will either give a lot of polish and professionalism to your work, or will make it look a little bit less professional if you aren't careful of it. So that's what we've got on that. Welcome to Session 8 on how to do bulletins, newsletters, and all sorts of other wonderful things for your church or ministry using desktop publishing and the computer. Now, this is going to be a really fun session. This is our final session of this video series, because in this one we're going to talk not only about production today, but we are going to talk about production tomorrow, which includes everybody's favorite hot topic of the year, the internet. So you will, after you leave here, not only know about how to get it done on your desktop, but we're going to talk about how you send it all over the world in 10 minutes or less. So this will be exciting. Okay, first of all, let's talk, before we get into that, about production today. Our primary method of getting our message out today is through printing. One of the things that I can't encourage you enough to do is to get to know your printer. A lot of folks who are doing desktop publishing have a really adversarial relationship with their printer, and oh, you know, all this kind of stuff. And usually, like many other adversarial relationships in life, that's just because of poor communication. One of the things that I loved when I was working at Young Life is, as I have shared with some of you earlier, we had an in-house print shop just down the hall, and whenever I had a chance I would go down there and I would say to the person who was the printer, actually there were several people down there, I'd say, now tell me what makes a print job really hard. And one of the things that I learned was, that was just amazing to me, even though I worked down there, is they said, you know, people assume that the person who prints the job is the person who took it in at the front desk. And 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. And I had them show me, I says, well, what works then? And they would pull out samples where people had written in detail, you know, reverse this here, use this color here, be sure that it's bound in a certain way, or that this doesn't overlap on that. And one of the ladies there, who's just a wonderful printer, she said, you know, when I get detailed notes like this, it helps so much because I know then exactly what the person is thinking. And so get to know the printer and find out exactly what their procedure is. Always take in a mock-up. And when I say a mock-up, I mean have it look exactly like you want it to look. I learned this the hard way early on in my publishing career, where you know, your regular old newsletter that looks like this, okay? You know, 11 by 17 sheets. Well, I took it in, instead of taping it together and taking it in like this, I just took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sheets. And I took it into the printer, and when I took it into them, I had it stapled up in the corner. How do you think I got that newsletter back? Yep, collated sheets stapled up in the corner. I was hysterical. I cried. You know, this was the first thing I've done for Young Life. They're going to kill me. You know, they took pity on me and completely reran the job. They didn't have to do that. That was my mistake. And so you want to make your mock-up just as exact as possible. Sometimes on your mock-up, something looks different than it's actually supposed to be printed. One time I was designing a logo for somebody, and it was on a dark red background, and then it had a logo on top. Well, I couldn't do that on my mock-up 100%, or it would have been all blacked out. But it had to be 100% because if it wasn't 100%, it would be pink and look really yucky. So even though it looked dark, I wrote a big note there in large letters, and I said, Dave, who was my printer at the time, I said, Dave, this looks like it's lighter, but I want you to shoot this at 100%. I got the blue lines back, which for those of you that aren't familiar with it, that's kind of like a negative of what it's going to look like, and it looked really washed out, and I said, this doesn't look like 100%. And he says, well, your thing wasn't 100%. And I said, Dave, let me see my mock-up. And he goes, oh, I just didn't read your note. I know better. So he needed to redo it. At that stage, to do her whole identity package, it really cost a lot of money if I hadn't had that note. So you want to be just real careful, and printers make mistakes, but they can be absolutely wonderful people. I've had some great experiences with printers over the years. And 2, I always not only take in a mock-up when you are first going, when you're actually going to print, but take one in early. I always go to my printer when I'm working on a new project, and I take it in and I say, tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what's a problem. Tell me how can I save money. Sometimes just by moving something a little bit apart, for example, on the design here, this was really a pain to do. See how that color overlaps this other bar? Now, because it's a denominational publication, they had it in their budget to do it. I'm always telling the lady that does this that every time I see this, I go through an envy attack because I can't afford 3 colors on my newsletter. But this is very expensive to do. On my newsletter, you'll see that purple, it has a purple nameplate, but it doesn't touch anything else. Just having it not touch anything else saves me about $100 a run. If it was overlapping with something else, they would have to use metal plates instead of the paper plates, and they cost more, and there's all those sorts of things. So just always take in your projects to the printer and say, what can I do differently? And they'll help you out on that. Okay, a little bit about printing today. Now let's talk about some really exciting stuff. Everything that you have learned in this video series, you can apply in so many areas of ministry. I want you to all take it and apply it to your church newsletters, your bulletins, the things you do for Sunday school classes, all of those sorts of things. But I don't want you just to stop there. The things that you have learned you can apply in many other ways, and there are many ways today too that you can get your information out that we couldn't even think of in the past. And we're just going to briefly touch on some of them, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the online world. One of the ways that you can do some very exciting things in ministry now, and more people are using this, is through databases. You've got all these great materials you've created. Now, how do you get them out to people? With database programs, it's just like an advanced address list. Many of you work in churches that have church management programs, but many of you are involved in ministry where you may not have a complete list of all of the people that are involved in your program. I really encourage you to get a database program, learn how to use it, and really make it an integral part of your desktop publishing process. The next thing is through fax machines. You've noticed probably I sent around a sign-up sheet for the seminars that we had today, and in that I ask you, and I always do, I ask people for their fax number, and I ask people for their email number. Now, fax machines, almost everybody has a fax machine today, and fax machines are a wonderful way to update people, to keep people informed of things. I just received an email the other night from a gentleman who is using his fax machine to send updated news to pastors in his area, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. One of the things that I did when I was in Colorado, I haven't had anybody who set this up for me as yet, but I was working with a lady. I've written a little booklet on devotions for people who do desktop publishing. And what we would do is we had a fax list, and you can program into your fax machine a whole list of numbers. All you have to do is enter it once, and it'll take care of it. And what we would do is every third Monday morning, we had a list of people that we faxed a little devotion to. And so they got to work in there. They had this encouraging devotion waiting for them on their fax machine. Some churches are experimenting with sending out their church newsletters on fax. One thing that I think can be very interesting with fax machines is if you are working with youth programs. A lot of people in their businesses have fax machines, and to find out the parents who, a lot of times when they get home at night, they are tired. They don't want to go through their mail. But during the day when they're getting other messages, let them know prayer requests then. Update them through the fax machine on what events are coming up, that kind of thing. And it can be a great way, too, for church boards to stay in contact with each other. So fax machines can be very, very helpful. Another thing that some ministries are doing is they are getting out their message through video, very short video programs, short CDs. Some churches are actually set up to do CD replication now. And the CD discs themselves, to reproduce them, only cost about $1 a piece. It's phenomenal how so much of this has gone down in cost. So I'm just kind of telling you some of these things to inspire you. The next one, which is of course very, very exciting to me, is online communication. Now, there are so many things that you can do with the internet and that you can do with online communication. Now, first I'm going to tell you a few stories, and then I will do a little explanation of how this works. But for example, the Friends Church, and a number of these stories come from the Friends Church because they've been using it extensively and doing some really exciting things. Recently, when they have been doing mission work, they send out with their mission team not only the evangelist and the support people, but they send out a gentleman who has a computer with him. And with the computer, he has a cellular phone, and he's linked up via email to people back in the United States. And they know that during a certain time, and recently they were down in Mexico way back in some some pretty dangerous new evangelistic sort of territory, doing evangelistic meetings. The people back in the United States knew at a certain time that the meeting was going to be going on, so there they were sitting around their computer terminal. Down in the jungles of Mexico is Stan with the evangelism team. The evangelist starts preaching. He's in the back there typing on his cellular. Okay, meeting started. Then evangelist gives the invitation. Stan's able to type over his computer terminal. Okay, he just gave the invitation. Everybody pray right now. Back in the United States, in real time, little Quaker prayer circles are gathered around the computer terminals and are able to pray for this evangelistic meeting that's going on right then. Another story, this is another one that I absolutely love. The Quaker region back where I come from in Colorado, they've really gotten into this, and they've set up prayer chains through email. And a lot of their pastors are on it, people in the congregations. Well, there was this lady who lived on a farm in Kansas. She was 81 years old. Her doctors told her she probably didn't have very much longer to live. Her heart was really failing, and in addition to that, she'd gone almost totally deaf, and so she couldn't really interact with people much anymore because people didn't want to take the time to communicate with her. However, her pastor was talking to her, and somehow or other she found out about this prayer network, and she said, I want to learn how to use the computer, and I want to get on that. And so he taught her how to use it, and she got involved in the prayer network. And when she couldn't sleep at night, she would get up and she would scroll back through the prayers and she would pray for the people. And then after a while she thought, well, this wasn't enough. She wanted to do more, so she started writing the people notes and encouraging them. And she got a real ministry going there online. And where she couldn't talk to people anymore because she couldn't hear, she starts corresponding with people all over and encouraging them, letting them know she's praying for them. And then she's still not satisfied. She went back to Merle and she said, Merle, this isn't enough for me. I want to become prayer coordinator of the area. So she becomes prayer coordinator, and she's getting more people involved in the prayer chain, doing all this kind of stuff. And then Merle, when he was telling me this, he said, just before I left Colorado, he said, and you know what? He said, I got to tell you, the latest thing in the story, he said, she went to her doctor a few weeks ago, and her doctor says to her, Betty, he says, have you been taking something I don't know about? And she says, no, why? He goes, well, your heart's all better. Isn't that wonderful? And you see, one of the things that's so exciting about online communication is absolutely nobody is left out. You can be deaf. You can be disabled in any variety of ways. You can be blind. I'm going to be doing a story in my newsletter next month. I just got an email from a gentleman who has set up a whole voice-activated system for some blind people in his congregation. There isn't a person anywhere in any physical condition that can't have a very active ministry online. When I was at the Single Adults National Ministries Convention, this one gentleman, he says, now there's a point to this story. He said, so bear with me. He said, we just conducted our first online baptism. I said, what? He said, well, this guy was getting baptized at our church, and so we had a guy back there with a cellular phone, the cellular thing, just describing to everybody what was going on. And he says this was really meaningful to everybody because we had people logged in all over the country because he said a group of us had been holding an online Bible study, and we led this guy to the Lord online. So everybody wanted to be part of his baptism. Isn't that great? So some of you are saying, now what in the world is she talking about? I'll show you. Okay. Here is your computer. And your little computer sitting there all by itself lonely. And here is the whole rest of the world and everybody else and all these other little computers. Well, how does your computer talk to their computer? Your computer needs something called a modem. This is, well, actually, first the telephone. This is a telephone. And then this little thing right here we'll call the modem. Now, the modem in a lot of PCs, it's built in, or you can have an external one. A modem is what converts computer talk to telephone talk. Computers talk in what's called digital language. Everything to a computer is just an off or an on switch. That's all computers talk. Everything that goes through the computer is coded into off, on, off, on, off, on. That's what makes up all the communication of the computer. Computers, you have to understand, are really dumb. They're just very, very fast. The more complex the image, the more of these little guys. Now, this is what computers talk. Now, what the problem is, the phone line to connect with all the rest of the world and all the other computers is what's called analog. That's in sound waves. You all remember that from science class, seeing what the sound waves are. Well, how do you translate this into this? That's what a modem does. Modem is short for modulator, demodulator. And that's what translates the two back and forth to each other. Okay, you've got your modem and you can get out there. Well, how do you get out and about and around and all that kind of stuff? Everybody has now heard about the internet or the information highway. Now let me explain a little bit how that started. The Lord can always take the most bizarre things and use them in the most interesting ways, and the internet's a great example of it. Post the Second World War, people were real paranoid that, you know, the Russians were going to bomb us and everybody's going to die and all that kind of stuff. So one of the ways that they wanted to fight against that is they set up these centers, different places around the country, that should nuclear war happen, these key centers would be able to stay in touch with each other. This early linkage of major computers was called ARPANET, and that linked all these computer centers together. Now, what they developed at that time was very interesting, is they developed all of the technology. It's progressed quite a bit to form the internet, but what's very, very interesting about it and has fascinating applications for Christian ministry is they made it a system that couldn't be shut down. If one area breaks down, the others can pick up. And so it's a virtually indestructible system. And this system worked pretty well where it was just major defense contractors and people, you know, major defense areas talking to each other. Well, as it grew, folks at the universities, say this was defense and all, folks at the university said, hey, you know, that's pretty neat. This would be a great way for us to share information also. So they linked into it. And places like MIT and Stanford and all that. And the links continued to grow, and it kept growing and growing and growing. But for many years, this was very hard to get into. The internet is kind of like worse than DOS. I mean, you had to understand what are called Unix commands and, you know, whole strings of all this kind of stuff that nobody had time to deal with. But the concept was really neat. Well, then somebody was looking at that and said, you know, that's really neat, but maybe I could make it where something where people in their own little personal computers and their modems, something that would work for them. So this enterprising gentleman came along and developed CompuServe. And this was the first commercial online service. But CompuServe was pretty much a self-contained world where the software was set up, and in your computer, then you could talk to anybody else that was on the CompuServe network. Not only could you talk to people that were on this network, but you could access files and information like what the weather's going to be in Tucson tomorrow and all these different kinds of things you could get through CompuServe. Now, CompuServe went along, and then America Online came about, and Prodigy came about, and all these other things. And people started using them in wonderful Christian ways. They started setting up prayer networks. In CompuServe, for example, there is a marvelous, huge Christian section called the Christian Interactive Network. And they tell me that they really didn't realize when they set it up that, and those of you that know CompuServe, the commands are go, that it's go sin. But people remember it. But it's a place where people can pray for each other, where people can share ministry notes, all kinds of things like this. On America Online, there's Christianity Online, huge Christian community, lots of neat things going on. But these pretty much operate in their own little circles. Then something happened to the internet that made it explode into everyone's consciousness. And this has tremendous impact for ministry. And all of the things that I've been telling you today, and that explosive thing is the World Wide Web. And what that is that's the internet with pictures. Everything that I have taught you in this series on how to use graphics, how to use design, how to break your message into parts, all of that works when you create communications for the World Wide Web. You can take exactly the stuff that I've taught you how to do and plug it right into this. And then what happened when this exploded is all these services became pipelines to this. And so today, if you are a part of any one of the online services, you can literally connect with believers and unbelievers all over the globe virtually instantaneously. And the ministry potential is wide open. For all of the things in the first of this series that we talked about for evangelism, People are able to ask you questions in closed countries that they can never ask. There is no country closed to the internet. People and a number of people are having extremely active and aggressive ministries to Muslims and people in closed countries where they can enter into dialogue about Christianity. People are sharing many, many things. And what does make this so interesting is, again, just like when they were where they set it up in the days where it was set up to be something for the national defense, it is still virtually indestructible. In the very first session, I challenged you because I said, you know, when a country goes to war, the first thing that they attack is a communication system. Well, you may or may not remember that when the United States tried to demolish Iran, they were able to demolish their television stations, they were able to demolish their radio stations. They were not able to demolish their internet connection. And they maintained those, and that's why they were as powerful as they were through the war. The internet connections are what gave the rebels at Tiananmen Square their communications ability. The internet connections were what enabled the people to have all the communications set up during the overthrow of the Soviet government. It's being used in incredibly powerful ways in the secular world. And so my challenge, of course, to all of you, as you work on communications for your churches is, think what we can do for the kingdom of God. I mean, you've got a whole new area out here, and all of the communication things that I'm teaching you, these are the things that you will be putting online. Within just the next few years, your church newsletters, your bulletins, all these are, and a lot of churches are doing it already. They're loading them up online for everybody to see, for people to drop by, to look at. Many, many people spend many hours a day just checking out websites. And I know a lot of people are afraid of pornography and things like that, and my response to that is, hey, you know, if we get enough people, when somebody gets on the web, we're sort of standing there with a virtual gospel tract in hand. We don't want them to get any place but past us. I mean, they want to get the gospel first. We want to give it to them first. So the things, like I keep saying, that you're learning, you've got a whole new area to apply them in, a whole new area to take them in, and it's very, very, very exciting. And let me just say, too, you know, we don't have time to go into detail on how to use it, but it's a whole lot easier than you think it is. I was very afraid to get online because everything that I approach with desktop publishing, it's a combination of excitement and absolute terror. And this one, it wasn't until Christian Computing Magazine informed me that I was their only columnist that wasn't online, and I was becoming a public embarrassment, that I finally did it. So be brave. I would like to close up our session here with a few notes on doing desktop publishing for the kingdom of God. Just a few encouraging notes to end with. First of all, I'm always so challenged with where it talks about when Jesus preached that the people heard him gladly. Isn't that neat? You know, a lot of times he had some very hard things to say, and he didn't cut back on the convictions of his message, but people heard him gladly. And when we're doing our desktop publishing, I think that should always be a goal. We want to design things that are pleasing to the eye. We want to do writing that is in levels, that people can get out the information that they need. We want it to be very complete. We want people to really learn all of the things that we want them to learn, and we want them to do it in a way that they will take it in a way that meets their needs, that they will hear our message gladly through our communications. Another verse that I find tremendously encouraging in doing desktop publishing for the kingdom of God is the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. We will always want more equipment. We will always want more RAM. We will always want a bigger computer. We will always want a better monitor. We will always want that software program that we can't afford. I mean, that is simply a given. And should the Lord tarry, who knows what we will be working with in the next 10 years. I mean, I thought technology had reached the epitome of perfection when the correcting typewriter was invented. I mean, it would never get any better than that. I was wrong. And I mean, who knows what we'll be dealing with. But we just say, my constant prayer is, Lord, today, give me the technology and the skills and the training that I need to do the ministry that you want me to do today, and help me to trust you that if I need something else tomorrow, that you'll give it to me. And finally, I just want to challenge you to take all of the things that we've learned, all of the things that you've heard, all of the things that you've seen, everything that you do in desktop publishing, and use it for the kingdom of God. There's no greater calling, there's no more wonderful project, and I just want to encourage all of you to, in every way that you can, take your words, that you might make the Word of God more real in your generation.